another aspect that's unique to Nancarrow, as you've already heard, is his obsession with speed and density and velocity. You heard some of that in this last piece, but there were also items of Nancarrow in which he made no real attempt to use some sort of subtle underlying structure. Instead, it was the pure joy and how many notes can I get this instrument to play in a small space of time. Nancarrow took that perhaps to its greatest extreme in his study number 25, in which in the last 12 seconds, there's over 1,000 notes played. So we're going to listen to the last minute of study number 25. And what Nancarrow does, just to be even more abrasive perhaps, or humorous, he just has the pedal held down. And so you just hear this sound of every possible note being played as quickly as possible on the instrument. And one thing that anybody who knew Nancarrow's music said was that every time they heard it, he wanted to play it for them faster than he had the last time. So at whatever speed we have these recorded, we can be sure that Nancarrow, we're playing them now, we want them to go even faster. So here's the last movement of his study number 25, which is the one in which he said that he finally understood how to write for the player piano. Up until number 25, he'd been writing for the player piano like it was just a very, very agile performer. Like it was a performer that could do things that other performers couldn't, but basically a traditional performer that plays perfectly every single time. But in number 25, he said, what can I do on the player piano that I would never ask a performer to do? It's totally different. So here's the last minute or so of number 25. He just said, okay, I'm at the end of this really fast piece. I'm going to use more notes per second than anybody's done in the history of music, and he succeeded. Nancarrow eventually came around back to writing music for actual instrumentalists. What happened is that people began to hear his music and think, there's really nothing in the world like this, and people started to want to play it. Of course, Nancarrow had been in Mexico for close to 40 years by that time, and didn't know that people were listening to his music. What happened is that people who had assimilated it, and there was lots of other new music going on, asked him to commission new works from Nancarrow, and Nancarrow was very wary of that. But to his great surprise, one of the groups, the Arditi String Quartet, who plays a lot of contemporary music, offered to read through his first string quartet, and they sat down and they sight-read it. Now, the quartets that had tried to play his piece when he first moved to Mexico and had caused him great disappointment weren't even able to play it with rehearsal. So the state of technical development in contemporary music had really gone a long way in terms of the skill of the performer. And Nancarrow began again writing music for players, but now informed by all the techniques that he had done for the player piano. Of course, now that he knew what he could do, the music was even more difficult for them, because he started doing the same sorts of things, like having one string player play 3/4 as fast as another one, and that person play 4/5 as fast as the next one, that one play 5/6 as fast as the next one, until you had a string quartet in which each person was playing at a slightly different speed. And then he would say, okay, I'll accelerate and get to the end at the same time. And so Nancarrow was really perverse in that kind of way, but people really loved playing his music. In fact, I believe a Juilliard graduate recently won a competition playing a piece of Nancarrow's called Tango, with a question mark, in which the pianist is playing 3 different lines of music with 2 hands, each 3 going at a different speed. So it's a very formidable piece to play. It's the kind of thing that a player piano would have no problem with, but that the fact that any human played it is really quite impressive. For the final portion of the talk this evening, what I'd like to go over is what it's like to write a little bit in Nancarrow's style. One of the best ways to understand and assimilate Nancarrow's techniques is not just to study them, but to try to imitate and perhaps build upon what he did. So there's multiple aspects to what Nancarrow did. One was his use of technology, and another one was the traditions that he invoked in the process of writing his own pieces. So technologically is probably the easiest part to get around. Now we have the digital equivalent of player pianos. We have sequencers on the computer and virtual pianos. So Nancarrow had to go through great efforts putting metal basically on each hammer of his piano to make it sound the way he wanted. But we can now adjust with comparative ease the sound of an instrument that's meant to be like a piano to get it to sound the way Nancarrow did. So a good model for how Nancarrow's piano sounds can be found at the beginning of his study number 22, which starts with individual notes. So it makes them easy to hear. So if we compare that, this instrument is nothing like Nancarrow's. It's far too rich and it's far too mellow. Nancarrow wanted this very kind of dry metallic sound. But what we can do with a virtual piano, meaning a physical model of a piano, all the strings, all the keys, the soundboard, is start tweaking parameters to try to come up with a sound or a piano that's more like the one that Nancarrow had in mind. So here's the sound of a virtual piano on the computer, keeping our fingers crossed that technology will work. A little bit loud, okay. But yes, it works fine. So here is, actually that was the punchline. That was Nancarrow's piano reproduced in the computer. But let me go back to the beginning. So here's an example of the computer reproducing just an ordinary piano sound. A little bit hard to click on the keys, but okay, not bad. It sounds more or less like the piano. Oh, there we go. Maybe not so rich, but we're working with fairly small speakers here. Same kind of idea. Now what we can do is begin adjusting things like how long are the strings. Well, we know that Nancarrow's piano was an upright piano. So let's make the strings shorter. And play it again. Already, that sound is weaker and stranger than it is on our rich Fazioli example, just by making the strings a little bit shorter. Now we know also that Nancarrow liked very, very hard hammers. So we can make the hammers as hard as they are able. And try that again. Closer to the sound of Nancarrow's piano. So by going through these various parameters, including ones that Nancarrow couldn't, for instance, Nancarrow liked a very dry sound. If he could, he would have the sound of every note stop and not be affected by the other notes. On a piano like this, if I just put down the pedal and hold down these notes, we can hear the other notes ringing in sort of sympathetic resonance. Even without me playing these notes, they're ringing just because the other notes were. But on a virtual piano, we can ensure that none of the notes will affect any of the others by completely eliminating sympathetic resonance.